The Ukrainian army struck another big blow to the Russian army with the operation. It's organized within the borders of Russia. Hot clashes between the Ukrainian and Russian armies have been going on since the beginning of the war. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry stated the two sides could not defeat each other and that there was a great rivalry. However, recently when the Ukrainian army started to liberate Russian-occupied territories, Russian forces started to increase their air strikes against Ukraine. The Russian military has been attacking energy infrastructure facilities in several Russian cities, including the capital Kyiv. With these attacks will Adam Putin plus to intimidate and panic citizens living in. Ukrainian leader Zelensky stated that the Russian army continues to commit war crimes by attacking presidential areas and infrastructure facilities on Ukrainian territory, addressing Ukrainian citizens. Zelensky said that the Russian army is trying to create chaos in the country and force Ukrainian citizens to leave their homes, telling Ukrainian citizens not to be afraid. Zelensky promised that the Patriot air defense systems pursued from the United will soon be placed in every city and the security of the cities will be ensured. However, the Russian army's unmanned planes attacked the city of Obuchi located within the borders of Kyiv in the past few days, and this has made Zelensky lose patience with this airstrike of the Russian army. The power generation plant in our book here was destroyed and the city was left without electric. Zelensky, angered by this attack of the Russian army, ordered the Ukrainian army to organize a major operation within the borders of Russia. Ukrainian forces sent a large number of soldiers and HIMARS missile systems to the Kupiansk region, which they liberated from Russian occupation. The city of Kupiansk, 180 kilometers from the Russian city of Balka Road, was one of the first cities liberated by the Ukrainian. From the city, Ukrainian forces can easily launch airstrikes inside Russia. Ukrainian soldiers first conducted a reconnaissance mission with unmanned fighter jets to locate Russian corridors and ammunition depots. INRO, the Ukrainian intelligence service, sent a coordinates of a Russian corridors in Alro to Ukrainian forces. It was understood that in this military headquarters, the training of the soldiers recruited into the army by Putin's mobilization order was carried. The Ukrainian army has made this headquarters a target in order to respond to Russia's airstrikes inside Ukraine's borders. If the operation had been successful, a Russian headquarters of 200 people would have been destroyed. It was also determined that the supply of ammunition to the Russian soldiers fighting inside Ukraine was carried out through this headquarters with the order of the Ukrainian commander. An air operation was launched and the fuse was. Ukrainian forces fired 9 HETS missiles towards the Russian headquarters. However, due to lack of intelligence, the Ukrainian forces were not informed that there was a Pan-Series R-1 model air defense systems at the headquarters. 4 of the missiles were neutralized by the air defense system. However, 5 HETS missiles successfully reached the Russian headquarters and the Russian ammunition depot. Russian soldiers training cat quarters were surprised by the impact of the explosion intensified. When one of the HUMS missiles hit the ammunition depot, the flames which reached mid-side caused Russian soldiers to flee. These soldiers, who had not yet completed their training, were lost what to do in the face of the Ukrainian army's attack. Although Russian commanders told the soldiers to take their weapons and stand at attention, Russian soldiers continued to run around with this operation of the Ukrainian army. This headquarters, which was supplying soldiers and ammunition to Russian soldiers on Ukrainian territory, was destroyed by the Ukrainian army's operation. All the detail of the operation were captured by drones, but Putin's real problem started now after this operation organized within the borders of Russia. Russian citizens, Lebanon, and Bor started to question Putin's leadership. Russian people who started to think that Russian leader Putin could no longer ensure Russia started to leave Russian territory. After the operation organized by the Ukrainian army within the borders of Alro, the residents of the region started to be uneasy. The people of the region who left their lives in Alro and started to leave Russia started to think that they were no longer safe. The people of Alro started to flee towards more central cities to protect themselves from these operations of the Ukrainian. However, explosions and fires continue to occur in many Russian cities, especially in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Russian citizens have started to flee Russia to countries such as Belarus, Lithuania, Georgia, and Turkey. These explosions and fires that have recently occurred within the borders of Russia have started to make Russian citizens very uneasy. In recent weeks, a natural gas pipeline in Moscow exploded, causing a huge. Shortly before this explosion, Russian ships in the port of St. Petersburg burned to the bottom of the sea. These fires and explosions, which took place in just 1 month, have frightened Russian citizens. Russian leader Putin has started to send defense systems to many cities to allay the fears and concerns of the Russian people, fearing an attack by the Ukrainian army en masse. Putin has started to place RDFA systems on the roofs of many administrative buildings in Moscow. Putin did not anticipate that the Ukrainian army would strike back when attacking cities in Ukraine. However, with the long-range missile systems pursuit from the United States, the Ukrainian army has a power to easily launch airstrikes inside Russia's border. As the war has started to be felt within Russia's borders, nearly 1 million citizens from Moscow alone have left Russia. Russian citizens with good financial situation are trying to escape from Russia by going abroad. However, Putin has found a way to prevent them from living to country. Faced with troop shortages, Putin has banned the exit of Russian citizens who are included in the mobilization. The Russian leader announced that male citizens who want to go abroad must now obtain a document approved by the DFAS ministry. The citizens involved in the mobilization decision were prevented from leaving the country. However, this did not stop Russian citizens. Russian citizens continue to leave the country by renting private jets. One of the things that the Russian people fear the most, Putin will announce a new mobilization order and include more Russian citizens in the army. This event, which has recently come to the agenda, again scares the Russian people. It is said that Vladimir Putin will organize a new attack on Ukraine in the spring. Everyone is aware that the Russian army needs more soldiers to carry out this attack. U.S. and Ukrainian officials have announced that will declare full mobilization and recruit 300,000 to 500,000 more citizens into the Russian army. Following these statements to Russian people who do not want to be included in the mobilization decision are looking for different ways to flee the country. According to many expert researchers, Putin's decision for a new mobilization would spell the end of. If a new mobilization is declared in Russia, Russian citizens will take to the streets to protest this decision. A new uprising in the country could spell the end of Putin. Realizing this, the Russian leader will want to prevent nationwide protests by giving full authority to the Russian security forces. In the previous partial mobilization decision, Russian citizens who took the streets were beaten and detained by Russian security forces. It is said that more than 10,000 Russian citizens were detained and imprisoned during these protests with Putin's new mobilization order. This number is expected to triple. Next news from Ukraine war. There is a secret to every job. The key to being a good chess player is to execute the appropriate moves at the appropriate time and in the appropriate location. This might make things a lot less difficult. There are some jobs that, if done correctly, can be completed in a matter of seconds rather than the days they would normally take. This also holds true during times of war. The Ukrainian army has gained a huge military superiority today operating in very strategic area. This operation left the Russian army completely helpless. We at Daily News have covered every aspect of the storied operation carried out by the Ukrainian military and have provided you with the relevant information. We are looking forward to your support in order to ensure that independent journalism can continue. You can support us by using the Support US button below because the Russian army did not have access to sufficient amounts of technical information. In preparation for this mission, it is currently experiencing significant difficulties in terms of its ability to carry out its invasion of Ukraine, the locations of large military depots in Ukraine, as well as the routes that connected these depots were unknown to the Russian troops stationed there as a result of the sudden operations carried out by the Ukrainian. The connection routes between the military bases held by the Russian army have been significantly severed. The Russian military consistently struggled with transporting their ammunition supplies. Checkpoints were established by Ukrainian troops at strategic highway intersections. These areas were inaccessible to Russian tanks in any direction. This also had a significant effect on the Russian army's ability to coordinate with one. While the Russian army was in very poor condition on some fronts, on others, there were a large number of tanks and weapons. The Ukrainian army aimed to do this by controlling the crossroads one after another. All of the regions in which the Russian army was short on ammunition saw operations carried out there. The Russian bases, which did not have enough weapons or troops, were taken over one by. The Ukrainian army was able to gain a significant advantage in this conflict by conducting these strategic operations. On the other hand, the Ukrainian military utilized drones to keep an eye on all of the military activities conducted by the Russian military. As a result, Russia's attack plans were made public. On the other hand, the Russian military was never informed as to which region Ukraine planned to. Putin was constantly in for unpleasant revelations. Additionally, the Ukrainian army was responsible for the destruction of railway systems due to the fact that Russia intended to transport tanks via rail. The destruction of these systems resulted in a significant amount of damage being sustained by Russia's ammunition shipments. Zelensky came to the conclusion that the only way to stop this was to demolish the railways. In his statement regarding this matter, Zelensky made the following remarks. Every single house, street, railroad, track, and bridge will be reconstructed. In order to accomplish this, we must first establish our independence. Zelensky is currently engaged in a historic struggle for the independence of Ukraine. He is giving up everything in order to achieve this. Since the beginning of the war, He has been exhibiting an extraordinary level of success. The respect of people all over the world is due to Zelensky. On the first anniversary of the war, journalists who went to Zelensky's office discovered something interesting there. Since the outbreak of hostilities, Zelensky has been making his home in a solitary cubicle within his. As a result of Zelensky's tireless efforts to boost morale among the troops and his skillful management of diplomatic negotiations, he's regarded as one of Ukraine's greatest heroes. Zelensky is held in high esteem by millions of people all over the world. Zelensky became Putin's nightmare. Another extremely unpleasant shock was in store for Putin today, courtesy of the Ukrainian. The Russian army has been stockpiling ammunition for a new operation for a number of days. In preparation for the launch of the new mission, in particular, ammunition was gathered in 6 different storage facilities all over the country. These storage facilities were home to a significant number of missiles. Additionally, machine guns and tank shells were transferred to the warehouse. The Russian military was under the impression that this shipment of ammunition had been conducted in private because the Russian military was aware that the Ukrainian army would follow the military trucks carrying these munitions. It refrained from transporting them in those vehicles. Instead, these arms were loaded onto military vehicles and transported non-stop for a period of 7. The Russian military was confident that this shipment was conducted in secrecy because they had seen no evidence to the contrary. On the other hand, Ukrainian intelligence services had their doubts about the actions of the Russian military. By using drones, the Ukrainian authorities were able to track these vehicles and determine that Russia was making preparations for a new attack. The Ukrainian army, on the other, made the decision not to shoot down the vehicles because they were carrying ammunition. Although it was a very risky move, the Ukrainian government has never been one to shy away from trying new things or taking chances. Since the beginning of the war, they have been able to accomplish all operations without any problems. They had a unique strategy in mind for this particular operate. The Ukrainian military made the decision not to shoot at vehicles carrying ammunition, but rather to destroy ammunition depots. Instead, they did this by waiting for the delivery of the ammunition to come to an end because they believed that a greater number of weapons could be eliminated in this manner. The Russian army had completely filled the warehouses after a week of receiving deliveries of. Now the last of the preparations for the new offensive that was about to be launched were being made at that point. Soldiers from the Ukrainian army moved into position. Jim Mars has been provided with the GPS coordinates of the ammunition storage facilities used by the Russian military. The missiles under Himmler's command carried out simultaneous attacks on these depots. The regions of Mariupol, Domestic, Maka-Kursk, the Baltsiv, and Anovesk were each home to one of these depots. The concurrent operation in so many disparate locations drove the Russian commanders completely insane. There was nothing the Russian army could do to stop this operation from happening. Russia sustained significant losses at the hands of the Ukrainian. The city of Meril was home to the storage facility that offered the most space. Overall, one of the decisive battles is taking place in this city, which can be found in the southern part of the domestic Olos. The Russian military is advancing from this region and creating a road connection with Crimea as they do so. Following the successful liberation of my region, the Ukrainian army intends to move on to Crimea. The collapse of the Kare Bridge, which served as a land link between Crimea and Russia, elevated the significance of my ripple. The Ukrainian army is preventing the Russian army from continuing the miracle. In order to reach Crimea, the Russian army wants to continue the obscuration of miracles. The fighting hasn't stopped in my relationship yet because Crimea is one of the most important points in this. The Ukrainian army is making preparations to free the peninsula in order to bring an end to this conflict. But why is the Crimea such a significant region? Putin launched his invasion of Crimea in 2014. Since that time, the government of Ukraine has been working toward the goal of regaining control of Crimea. There were a greater number of attempts to do so after Zelensky was elected president of. The Russian military's assault on the entirety of Ukraine brought about a change in this situation. However, Zelensky predicted that the Ukrainian armed forces would invade Crimea and free the city there. According to Zelensky's account, one of Zelensky's statements regarding this matter became a rallying cry for independence. The conflict first broke out in Crimea. It is going to conclude in Crimea. The situation in Crimea is very significant for Putin's reputation. When Vladimir Putin invaded Crimea, there was non-stop propaganda in Russia depicting Putin as a hero. Putin was praised for his actions. Putin's reputation will take a significant hit in the event that the Ukrainian army is successful in retaking control of Crimea. Putin is very concerned about the current situ. It is possible that Putin's political career in Russia will come to an end. If Crimea is liberated, it's possible that this will bring an end to the war. Because of this, the Ukrainian army is exerting a lot of effort to win back control of Crimea. In the coming days, Crimea will be the region of the war that sees the most violent fighting as a result of the destruction of the ammunition ammunition depot. The Russian army is unable to fight in Crimea at this time because of this significant operation. The Ukrainian army has clearly established a clear advantage in terms of strategy. Putin is completely powerless in this situation. What are your thoughts on the attacks that the Ukrainian army has been launching against Russian ammunition depots? What are your thoughts on the performance of the Ukrainian armed forces? Do you believe that Zelensky is doing a good job managing the Ukrainian army? What are your thoughts on the recent events that have taken place in Korea? Remember to give us your feedback and to share your thoughts with us. Keep up with us here for further updates. The TP Daily News YouTube channel owns these videos and all of their associated intellectual property. There is no need to rely on any other social media public. Our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook usernames are all listed on the app Daily News website. We take legal action against every website and channel that utilizes it without our authorization. The Russian military eventually found themselves in the hole they had dug for themselves. They brought it down on themselves. With the Operation Russia planned, the Russian troops' carelessness has resulted in a significant amount of trouble. The sophisticated intelligence that Ukraine possesses remains Russia's worst nightmare. Putin has gone completely insane over the past few days. Large explosions have been heard in the city of Kharkov, which is still under occupation by the Russian government. The explosions were covered by news outlets all over the world. It was reported that a large number of anti-personnel mines went off 17. These mines have the ability to vanish entirely within the snowy landscape of Kharkov. These shattered psyches give off no telltale signs in any way. The explosion has the potential to disable a large number of armored vehicles and military personnel. The known characteristic of these mines is that the detonation of one of them can cause other mines to react and cause an explosion in a large area if they are deployed in close proximity to one. This can happen if they are deployed in close proximity. This significant setback for Russia is further evidence that Ukraine is in a superior position. This time, the Russian soldiers' attempt to invade Kharkov was a mistake that led to their falling into their own trap that they had set for themselves in preparation for their invasion of the Kar region. Russian troops had planted mines and other forms of landmines across a significant portion of the anti-personnel mines are still currently deployed throughout the region. Throughout this operation, Ukraine demonstrated once again how technologically advanced its intelligence community is. The Ukrainian government, which utilized this intelligence effectively and was successful in all of its operations, broadcast its victory cries to the entire. This time, if you come to the incident where the explosions occurred, Russian forces who attempted to invade the Kharkov region recently went on a mission to deploy anti-personnel mine traps once more. This is what caused the explosions during the course of this mission. Anti-personnel mines were going to be placed in a variety of different cargo locations. During the course of this mission, a significant error was, once again, the inexperience of the Russian soldiers in the mission to deploy mines was brought to light during this mission, which took place in the snow-covered forests of Kharkov. It was the intention of the Russian soldiers to complete this mission without being spotted by any of the Ukrainian troops. Later on in the mission, the Russian soldiers, who were disguised with white snowsuits so that they would not be seen, took a break to tend to their most fundamental require. The measures of secrecy that were taken during the mine deployment should have continued throughout this break as well. However, a rookie mistake made by Russian soldiers resulted in their deaths in the frigid environment of Kharkov. Lighting a fire for the Russian soldiers so that they could cook their meals or get warm while they were on a break was a grave error on anyone's part. The anonymity of those involved in this endeavor is of the utmost significance, and they put the brakes on the location where the Russian troops were stationed. However, due to his lack of experience, one of the Russian recruits was unable to start a fire in order to keep himself warm and prepare his food. Even though Russian commanders were aware of this fire, it did not take long at all for the advanced intelligence of the Ukrainians to discover. It is common knowledge that Ukraine's barracks are equipped with unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, that conduct intelligence gathering missions across the entire conflict zone. When the UAVs observed the fire director, they immediately relayed this information to their respective commanders. The Ukrainian forces that began to prepare performed exceptionally well in the management of this operate. The operation successfully eliminated these Russian soldiers from the fight. The following is the plan for the operation. The OP objective of the Russian army, which planted a large number of mines in the area, was to fool them into believing that this error was not noticed when it occurred. Even though no one had noticed it, this operation would start after everyone had returned to their duties. The Ukrainians believed that if any heavy weapons were, the Russian forces would become aware of them and flee the scene. The mission would be carried out by 3 Ukrainian sniper personnel known for their exceptional skills. The Russian forces continued their mission of laying mines, despite the fact that they were under the impression that the firing had gone unnoticed because of the tremendously effective intelligence gathering capabilities of the Barak. The Ukrainian sniper made his home on a prominent hill in the region and reported his findings to the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian sniper took his position atop the hill, and he waited for the best possible opportunity to strike at precisely the same time that Russian forces were laying mines. 3 snipers began firing at the Russian soldiers who were in the lead. The Russian soldiers who experienced extreme panic when the fire was opened would ultimately be responsible for their own deaths as a result of the fire that was opened on the Russian forces. 3 Russian soldiers were wounded in the legs. The Russian forces that started running away as a result of the shock effect of being shot never followed the orders of their commanders to lie down and take cover because of the shock effect. The 3 Russian soldiers who began to run towards the location where the mines had been placed did not even consider the possibility that the ground they were treading on was contaminated with mines. The mines that the soldiers ran over caused large explosions in every single one of the checkpoints that they passed through, and the declarations of Ukraine, which accomplished yet another significant victory. The items listed below were incorporated. 20 Russian soldiers were eliminated at the location where they were found. Every bottle of wine that was used during the mission from the very beginning, all the way up until the very end, was deactivated. The information that was captured pertains to the locations of the mines that were planted during these mining operate, which had been carried out in the past in many different parts of the Karpal region. Because of the information that was gathered, the Kira region was completely free of mines that were hostile to personnel in the operation that was carried out. Russian soldiers, once again, demonstrated their lack of experience just as they did in this operate. In the preceding few days, because of a mistake caused by inexperience like this one, Russia sustained significant financial losses. It has once again become abundantly clear that the Russian soldiers do not receive training, and that anyone who is given a gun is sent to the front, where fighting is taking place according to the statements made by the Russian commanders who were. It is dangerous and potentially lethal for the soldiers who will enter the Russian troops to be trained for only 1 day before being sent to hotspots where fighting is taking place. It is also possible to see Putin's disastrous approach to the war. Here Putin is becoming increasingly frustrated with the incompetence of the Russian forces, which has led to repeated setbacks in the most recent operate. Wagner's leader in Afghanistan, Prin, did not remain silent when this topic was brought up. The Afghani Prin argued that Russian soldiers have been extremely inexperienced from the very beginning of the war, and that they have not been given adequate training. He stated that these operations should be stopped and that they should be done by those who are familiar with the job. If it continues on like this, they will not achieve any. According to the leader of the Wagner organization, Afghani Prin, it would be beneficial for them to take part in any operation that Russia might try to carry out. The Wagner forces, which are bolstered by mercenaries, have reached the point where they are unable to accept these mistakes following Putin's unsuccessful attempts to the threat of a military overthrow looms ever larger in Vladimir Putin's. Putin never takes action because he is afraid of a coup attempt. Many soldiers who think about or do nothing about a coup attempt continue to be arrested despite the incredible powers given to commanders who are militarily favorable to Putin. This is because Putin has given these commanders the authority to do whatever they want. Many soldiers are forced to flee their posts and leave the military as a direct result of Putin's continued implementation of these harsh policy. As a result of the incalculable amount of harm that Putin has brought upon the nation, many people believe that his time in office has come to an end. The fact that he has been responsible for the deaths of a great number of people in order to fulfill his own ambitions is one indication of how dire the current situation is. The declarations to stop Putin from committing this atrocity at every point were either getting harder and more difficult day by day, or they were increasing in frequency. Even his own people are continuing to demonstrate against him as a result of the difficulties he is having on an economic level and the deaths of many of his relatives. The efforts to end Putin's occupation are being led by Western nations and involve the entire international sea. War analysts believe that Russia's current path will ultimately lead to the country's demise. You can help us out by becoming a subscriber. Both Russia and Ukraine have vowed to continue fighting in what appears to be an endless war. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has now entered its second year. Few people anticipated that the conflict would last for more than a few weeks, but the hopes of a speedy and decisive victory for Russia quickly faded. As the attacks on Kiev and Odessa were thwarted and failed, acute mobilization helped to recharge badly battered Russian troops at the front, which dashed Ukrainian hopes that the Russian army would be rotated and collapsed as a result of their defeat. These hopes were similarly dashed on the Ukrainian side, as it is now abundantly clear that the war may continue for some time, as neither Russia nor Ukraine have shown any sign over the past few months that they they are inclined to give up the fight against one another. At the same time, the tension between the parties reached a more stable rhythm. What kinds of developments can we anticipate during the second year of the anticipated supreme offensive by Russia is thought to have already begun. According to observers from NATO, Russia is making progress on its own in the Donbass along a number of interconnected axes of progress. Russia is having more success in some areas of the conflict than in others. It is highly improbable that the formidable offensive will result in a significant breakthrough which will put pressure on Kiev and enable Ukraine to break through the wall. The Russian military is supported financially in a variety of ways, and her staff in comparison to a year ago, as the majority of their most advanced equipment and most experienced troops were killed or captured during the conflict. In addition, the prospects of Russia expanding the scope of the conflict beyond the front lines do not look very promising. The elimination of the possibility of a Russian attack along the Black Sea coast was most likely accomplished by the liberation of Kherson. The missile attack that Russia launched against Ukraine resulted in property damage, but did not significantly undermine Ukraine's morale. The Ukrainian armed forces are likely to make their appearance sometime in the next few, to be prepared to carry out operations with the goal of breaking through the front lines held by Russia and regaining some of the territory that was lost the previous year. In contrast to the Russians, the Ukrainians will almost immediately have at their disposal an army that is more capable than the one they formed a year ago. The technological and material foundation of this army was unquestionably improved as a result of Western arms. In recent days, the Ukrainian armed forces have begun to carry out striking offensive operations as part of their ongoing efforts to develop their capabilities. Mariupol, currently held by Russia and the site of one of the war's most famous battles, is rife with explosions, despite the fact that the city is now under Russian. There have been at least 18 attacks over the course of 3 consecutive days, significantly accelerating efforts to retake Ukraine's captured southern corridor, which is the coastline connecting Crimea. These attacks were launched by Ukraine last week as a series of surprise attacks on Russian troops and supply lines in Mariupol. In recent days, Ukraine has developed a method for carrying out an attack behind Russian. A string of unexplained explosions occurred in territory that was under Russian control. Explosions were reported here along the village line of Yelta village and Yuka village, approximately 6 months after Mariupol fell under a fierce Russian siege. It is common knowledge that invading Russian forces have established their command center along this line, and that Russian troops are currently stationed in Mariupol. He takes aim at a number of members of the Ukrainian armed forces using a weapon of unknown origin. Recent successful attacks carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces resulted in the destruction of the Russian headquarters. There is no doubt that these explosions had a negative impact on the Russian soldiers who were stationed in the headquarters. In addition to that, a sizable portion of the arsenal and ammunition stored in the headquarters were both destroyed. On the other hand, nighttime explosions in and around the Mepa airport have dealt an incurable wound to the Russian occupying troops. This most recent attack by Ukraine has given them another incurable wound. There are no attacks that are blowing up during There was extensive coverage of all Russian headquarters, as well as Russian arsenals on information platforms controlled by Russia, independent news outlets in Ukraine, and local social media in Ukraine. According to some accounts, if not all of them, the Ukrainian armed forces participated in the attacks using their newly developed long range. The previous day it was announced via official Ukrainian Telegram channels that there were at least 11 or 12 explosions at Mariupol on the grounds of a steel mill. An explosion occurred at the airport in addition to 2 or 3 others. The majority of reports cited a total of 15 side effects. Andrei Chenko, the exiled mayor of Mariupol Pet, stated in a press release that the attack started fires at 2 Majo aviation fuel storage facilities at the airport and severely injured Russian troops at the steel mill. Both of these facilities are located at the airport. In addition, analysts believe that the new initiative marks the beginning of the efforts made by Ukraine after their armies have been strengthened with Western. There is discussion of launching a massive coordinated attack in order to create a border along the coast between Russian forces in the east of the country and those in the south of the country. Mariupol became an important garrison from Moscow's forces because Moscow believed that the port on the Sea of Azov was too far away to be attacked by the Ukrainian forces that were closest to it. When taking into consideration the most recent, this was the very first official confirmation that the Ukrainian armed forces were involved. For some reason, they had been able to hit targets in Mariupol from a greater distance than they had been able to in the past. It is asserted that the attacks carried out by the Ukrainian military occurred well outside of the typical firing range of the HIMARS and M270 systems that are utilized by the armed forces. The M270 and HIMARS multiple launch rocket systems, both of which were manufactured in the United States, are the most common forms of long-range offensive weapons that the Ukrainian armed forces have employed in combat thus far since the end of June. Ukrainians have been using them primarily to fire GPS-controlled, precision-guided missiles at high-value targets like Russian ammunition, depots, and command posts depending on the firing conditions. The M3101 missiles that have been made available to the Ukrainians by the United States of America for use with the HIMARS and 270 systems have an approximate maximum range of 7 kilometers. Despite numerous requests from Ukraine, the United States did not comply with the request to hand over to Kiev an upgraded GMLRS missile that had a range of 150 kilometers as a. Some government officials in Washington believe that supplying Ukraine with weapons with a longer range could provoke aggressive behavior from the Kremlin. The closest suitable launch sites for Ukrainian guided missile attack using the HIMARS system against Mariupol are likely 82,855 kilometers from where the explosions occurred. In addition, the manufacturer of the M3101 missile, Lockheed, claims that the range of the M3101, which carries an 88-kilogram warhead, exceeds 70 kilometers. The Ukrainian military is currently preparing for a new attack by shaping their battle fleet. But what was the result of the truck Mariupol from last night, which was held deep within territory that was held by the enemy and was beyond the range of HIMARS RGL LSMBs that were in? The intelligence sources in Kiev refused to discuss the attacks concerning the wheelchair-heavy MLRS used by Ukraine. In the past, Ukraine has attacked deep inside enemy lines and even areas using drones, special forces officers, and local partisan groups. A Ukrainian long-range rocket system that has been operational since 2008 is located inside what Russia will claim as its T. The weapon has a range of approximately 130 kilometers. The large design bureau in Kiev claims that the Ivanka and missile are both unguided, but that they typically hit their targets within a 30-meter circle even when they are at a great distance. Since late 2010, Swedish Saab and Boeing, a giant in the aerospace industry in the United States, have had an interest in developing a weapon known as the GLS. By affixing glider wings to the GPS-guided warhead, it was planned to increase the amount of distance that could be traveled by a missile with a HIMARS, making it possible for diminutions to fly at ranges of up to 150 kilometers and continuously hit the target in a separate turn of events following the initial attack that took place a week. Russian-appointed officials attempted to reassure locals by claiming that their air defenses shot down Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles (UAVs). Prior to the start of the war, there were approximately 500,000 people living in the industrial port of Mepa, but it is believed that only approximately 90,000 Ukrainians occupied the. Why then does Vladimir Putin place such a high priority on the Mepa war, which was marked by bloody conflicts? Mepa, a predominantly Russian-speaking city in the region of eastern Ukraine, known as the Donbass, where President Vladimir Putin erroneously claimed to have carried out genocide prior to launching his invasion of Ukraine, is a potent symbol for. Paul is located in the region of eastern Ukraine where President Vladimir Putin falsely claimed to have carried out genocide. The AZA tool is still operational in the middle of the city, which has become the final stronghold of the Ukrainian Army's UF battalion-rooted fragment, which is a military group on the far, is the last pillar of resistance for the Ukrainian government in Mariupol. As Moscow forces launched their final assault to take control of the city, Mr. Putin's campaign against Ukraine would finally be successful if Russia were to take control of almost all of Mariupol. Nevertheless, achieving these objectives appears to be an extremely challenging prospect for Russia at the present time. Ukraine's resistance continues in Mary. Remember to subscribe to our channel and activate the notifications on your device so you can be notified immediately whenever we upload new videos. We appreciate you keeping an eye on us.